The character of Jon Snow in George Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series and the HBO Game of Thrones TV show presents a fascinating study and adaptation. Though both mediums portray Jon as a brooding hero grappling with his identity, leadership, and relationships, there are significant differences in how these themes are explored. The books offer a much more layered and introspective depiction of Jon, emphasizing his internal conflicts, moral ambiguity, and the harsh consequences of his decisions. Meanwhile, the TV show often simplifies these complexities, presenting Jon as a more conventional, action-oriented hero. The nuances in his relationships, leadership struggles, and overarching journey are often overshadowed by the need for streamlined narrative progression on screen. Here is an expanded exploration of these differences. In the books, Jon Snow's inner life is richly detailed, and readers are given deep insight into his thoughts and fears. Throughout the series, Jon struggles with his identity as a bastard of Winterfell and his desire to prove himself worthy of both the Stark name and his place in the Night's Watch. Jon frequently reflects on the stigma of being a bastard and the limitations it places on his future. For instance, in A Game of Thrones, page 91, Jon muses, "A bastard had to learn to notice things, to read the truth that people hid behind their eyes." This awareness of his outsider status colors much of his decision-making and his sense of self-worth. Moreover, Jon is constantly torn between his Stark heritage and his loyalty to the Night's Watch. In A Storm of Swords, page 795, Jon's inner monologue reveals his deep internal conflict. "I swore a vow. I am a brother of the Night's Watch now, and I cannot serve two lords." This sentiment underscores Jon's ongoing struggle to reconcile his personal desires with his duties. Unlike the show, where Jon appears more resolute, the books present him as a character perpetually questioning his decisions and grappling with his uncertain identity. These internal conflicts also extend to his struggle with power and leadership. After being elected Lord Commander of the Night's Watch in A Storm of Swords, Jon faces numerous challenges in maintaining his authority, particularly as a young man with little formal leadership experience. Remember, in the books, Jon is only 16 years old at this point. He constantly doubts his ability to lead, as seen in A Dance of Dragons, page 146. "I am too young, and the task is too big for me. I am no Lord Commander. I am no man of great renown, and I have no claim to greatness. I am the son of a dead man and a shadow." This self-awareness and vulnerability makes Jon's character more relatable in the books, as he navigates the weight of leadership with uncertainty and hesitation. On the TV show, however, Jon's internal struggles are simplified. While the show does touch on his issues of identity and duty, it rarely delves into the level of introspection seen in the books. In Game of Thrones, Jon is often portrayed as a noble hero, driven by a sense of duty and righteousness. His moments of doubt are fleeting, and he tends to be more decisive in his actions. For example, in Season 5, Episode 8, Hardhome, Jon takes immediate and bold action against the threat of the White Walkers, showcasing his leadership through combat and quick decision-making. The internal turmoil that colors his character in the books is largely absent here, replaced by a more straightforward depiction of a reluctant yet effective leader. In the books, Jon's journey as a leader is fraught with tension and moral ambiguity. After being elected Lord Commander, Jon faces numerous difficult decisions, particularly in his interaction with the wildlings. His choice to allow the wildlings to cross into the safety of the wall is deeply unpopular among his fellow brothers of the Night's Watch. This decision is not made lightly, and Jon is acutely aware of the potential consequences. In A Dance of Dragons, page 926, Jon reflects, "The shield that guards the realms of men, but all men are not one." This statement encapsulates Jon's dilemma. He must weigh the greater good against the personal animosities of his men. His leadership is marked by a constant balancing act between his duty to protect the realm and the immediate practicalities of managing a fractured and divided brotherhood. Jon's leadership is also complicated by his youth and inexperience. In A Dance of Dragons, page 457, Jon admits to himself, "I am too young to lead, too green to wear a cloak of such heavy weight." This acknowledgement of his inadequacies adds depth to his character, as Jon is aware that he is not a traditional leader and must navigate his role carefully. His actions are often seen as controversial, leading to betrayal and dissent within the Watch, particularly in his final chapters in A Dance of Dragons, where his decisions provoke mutiny amongst his men. The tension between Jon's vision for the future and the reluctance of his followers to embrace change adds layers of complexity to his characters in the books. In the show, however, Jon's leadership is portrayed in a much more heroic light. His decisions, though sometimes questioned by others, are often depicted as morally sound and necessary for the survival of the realm. For instance, in Season 6, Episode 9, The Battle of the Bastards, Jon is shown leading his men into battle with the clear intent to claim Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton. While his tactics are not without flaw, his willingness to put himself on the front lines makes him a more traditional hero figure. His leadership is less about internal conflict and more about taking decisive, bold action to protect those he cares about. The show often frames Jon's decisions as being for the greater good, with less emphasis on the personal and political fallout that characterizes his leadership arc in the books. In the books, Jon's relationships are complicated by his status as a Night Watch commander and his own internal conflicts. His relationship with Ygritte, for example, is fraught with tension as Jon struggles to reconcile his growing affection for her with his vows to the Night's Watch. In A Storm of Swords, page 654, Jon reflects on his bonds with Ygritte. "I have to go home, Ygritte. I have to." This moment is a clear demonstration of Jon's internal conflicts between love and duty, which is much more pronounced in the books than in the show. Jon's relationship with other characters, such as his fellow brothers of the Night's Watch, are also more complex in the book. He often grapples with feelings of isolation, particularly as his decisions distance him from those around him. His connection to Samwell Tarly, for example, is based on a shared sense of being outsiders. Yet even that friendship is tested by Jon's responsibilities as Lord Commander. In A Dance of Dragons, page 138, Jon contemplates the burden of leadership and how it separates him from others. "A Lord Commander cannot be a friend to his men, no more than he can be a father or a brother." This isolation underscores the loneliness that comes with power, a theme that is explored more deeply in the books than in the show. In the shows, if we look at the relationship between Jon and Ygritte, we can see that it is portrayed more romantically and less conflicted. The love story is central to Jon's arc in Season 2 and 3, with less focus on his internal struggles. In Season 3, Episode 5, Kissed by Fire, Jon and Ygritte's relationship is framed as a passionate love affair, with Jon's feelings for her appearing less fraught with tension than in the books. This romanticized version of the relationship makes Jon's eventual betrayal of the Wildlings and his return to the Night's Watch seem more like a heroic sacrifice than a deeply conflicted decision. Jon's relationship with other characters in the show are similarly streamlined. His bond with Samwell Tarly, for example, is portrayed as a steadfast friendship, with less emphasis on the emotional distance that Jon's leadership role creates. The show often presents Jon as a more charismatic leader who inspires loyalty through his actions, rather than as an isolated, introspective figure seen in the books. In the books, Jon's heroism is more ambiguous and grounded in moral gray areas. He makes difficult decisions, knowing that they may not be seen as heroic by those around him. In A Dance with Dragons, page 978, Jon reflects on his role as Lord Commander. "I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls." His perception of himself is shaped by duty rather than personal glory, and he often sacrifices his personal desires for the greater good. Jon's actions are frequently controversial, particularly his decision to allow the Wildlings through the wall, which ultimately leads to his betrayal by his own men. This fallibility makes Jon a more complicated and tragic figure in the books, where his heroism is not always recognized or rewarded. In the show, on the other hand, Jon's heroic arc is more traditional. His actions are often depicted as morally righteous, and he is constantly portrayed as the savior of the North. In Season 7, Episode 6, Beyond the Wall, Jon's heroism reaches new heights when he volunteers to lead a dangerous mission beyond the wall to retrieve a white. His willingness to risk his life for the greater good, even in the face of near certain death, is emblematic of the more conventional heroism that defines his character in the show. Jon's potential resurrection is a major unresolved plot point in the books. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, Jon is betrayed and stabbed by his fellow Night's Watch brothers. His fate is left ambiguous, creating suspense about whether he will be brought back to life and what that resurrection might mean for his character. The book hints at the possibility of resurrection through the presence of Melisandre and her knowledge of R'hllor's magic. But Jon's actual fate remains unknown. This ambiguity greatly adds to the complexity of Jon's arc, as his potential resurrection could have profound implications for his character and the story. In the show, Jon's resurrection is a major turning point. In Season 6, Episode 2, Home, Jon is brought back to life by Melisandre after being stabbed to death by his fellow Night's Watch brothers. His resurrection is portrayed as a moment of destiny, with Jon returning to life with a renewed sense of purpose. This event solidifies Jon's role as a messianic figure, destined to save the realm from the threat of the White Walkers. His resurrection also marks a shift in his character, as Jon becomes more focused on his larger role in the war for the survival of humanity, moving away from the internal conflicts that defined him earlier in the series. The differences between Jon Snow in the books and the TV show highlights the contrast between a richly textured, morally ambiguous character and a more traditional action-oriented hero. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Jon is a complex figure, constantly grappling with his identity, his sense of duty, and the consequences of his actions. His leadership is marked by internal conflict and difficult moral choices, and his relationships are fraught with tension and ambiguity. In contrast, the TV show simplifies many of these complexities, presenting Jon as a more straightforward hero who consistently acts for the greater good. While the show's version of Jon is compelling in its own right, the depth and nuance of his character in the books offer a more multifaceted and ultimately more tragic portrayal. Thank you so much for listening into the video. I hope you enjoy the content. Please like and hit that subscribe button. Cheers.